Good morning. This morning we're fortunate enough to be joined by Mr. Paul Gosling, and Paul is a Senior Director at ARM. He's responsible for engineering delivery. Paul is speaking in his personal capacity, so let's just put that on record. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Tinus. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. So glad to speak to you, even during these COVID times, being difficult to get into the office and doing things like the nature backdrop you've got there. Where is that?
This is actually from Snowdon. So I love going to Snowdon. Been going there for decades, and I was lucky enough to get there during a brief interlude in lockdown last August, and this photo is from then.
So Paul and I worked together at by Sherlock, a company that's since changed name and I think split up as well, in Cambridge. And this was, I think, in the region of 10 to 15 years ago. So Paul, let's actually start there. Since our time at Pi Sherlock, which was obviously in the automotive industry, you have moved to a semiconductor company called ARM, it's a different discipline. Can you speak to some of the challenges that you faced moving from automotive into that area?
Yeah, well, just to give you a bit of context first, I actually joined that Pi Sherlock where we worked. I joined there as a graduate, as their first graduate, in fact, and ended up there for a full 18 years. So that was really interesting. And then that world, as you'll experience yourself, it's safety related, very kind of strict discipline in terms of how you do development. But that company, I loved the culture, the people, the work was really enjoyable. So I really kind of felt like I fit there. But after 18 years, definitely wanted a change. So I jumped into a different technology, different company, and it's just one of those things. I guess it happens to all of us, but didn't quite land in that company, didn't just fit or work for me. So I only spent about 18 months there, and then I joined ARM. So that's almost 8 years ago now. And on joining ARM, it kind of felt like I was coming home in a way. It just landed, and it felt very kind of comfortable and almost familiar. I guess one of the challenges, even though you're kind of having the software education and previous career, one of the challenges was just the absolute breadth of technology at ARM and the three-letter acronyms everywhere. Even ARM itself is a nested three-letter acronym. So I think that was one of the challenges, was that move across in terms of all the new technology. But in terms of company feel and fit, that felt really good, actually. That was quite an easy transition to make.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, I find two things just from my perspective as well. I find it takes about 6 months just to get used to the acronyms once you move industry. I had the same thing coming from Rolls-Royce into Pi Sherlock, and then for all the subsequent moves. And another thing that's quite interesting to me as somebody from this technical background, how easy it is actually to transfer the technical skills. To a large extent, you take everything with you, and getting to the technical or managing to cope with the technical stuff is not the biggest challenge. It's often just, like you say, finding the right fit. Paul, could you speak to me about what your daily tasks entail? What does Senior Director Engineering Delivery at ARM even mean?
Yeah, so I could probably summarize it as, some people would think of it as like an operations lead, but then even operations means lots of different things to lots of different people. So essentially I work with teams of project managers. The project managers themselves are working with engineering teams in different groups, different technologies. But in my role, it's all about the kind of the planning, the estimating, and the delivery. So I kind of have accountability for that and what the project managers are doing. In terms of my personal day-to-day, it will be a mix of literally focusing on kind of the here and now. Are things on track? Are there anything that, any kind of stakeholder management we need to do in terms of maybe things where things aren't quite going to plan? It could be around looking forward. There's an awful lot of forward-looking work and what's coming down the road, either technology-wise or in the field of project and program management, or it could be around people and how that's looking. And really, I guess my role is all about trying to help ARM meet its goals and its deliveries. So in my role, I look after some financial aspects and procurement aspects, as well as facilitating with hiring. So it's something of a signposting role as well, because you can imagine it's a big company. There's lots of different groups, and sometimes people aren't quite sure where to go to get something done. So I can help kind of signpost. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And really, the days of me working with a computer of my own and a compiler, and that's it, are long gone. So it's all about people.
Right. And do you miss that, Paul? Do you miss that technical hands-on feeling?
That's an interesting question, actually, because I have reconnected with it a few times over the years. So, like a lot of people, I guess, you kind of get a bit hobbyist about it, and you kind of go back and you get a Raspberry Pi and you do a bit of a project. And in some ways, I really missed it, and I love setting something up and doing a little project and then seeing it work and then connecting to it from your phone and kind of geeking out and that kind of side of it. And probably in about equal measure, I find technology really infuriating when it doesn't work.
Yes.
Or things should be really simple, just take forever for various reasons. And in some ways, that's part of what my job and kind of Arm's job is all about, is just trying to make some of the stuff that should be kind of standard and easy exactly that. And
in terms of your daily experience in a company that is world leading, it's a world leading semiconductor company. What does that feel like? It sounds very glamorous, and from our perspective, I mean, we work with these compilers and these microchips every day. What does it feel like working at such a world leading company?
It feels really great for different reasons. Partly going back to the people and the culture. Does have a kind of super heightened sense of trying to be very supportive, look after its people, and particularly in the last year, we've really seen that. I mean, it's been we pretty much moved to working from home overnight, more or less a year ago, and that was quite a feat. But it for a lot of people, it just worked, and people who had a decent home environment that they could work in, it just worked. And there was a lot of care and effort put into that. And then for some people, obviously, they didn't have a great home environment, so that took extra work to try and sort out. But huge amount of support, and kind of touching on the theme as well of early careers and graduates. I mean, I think I've been trading on my pre-existing network over the last year quite heavily, but we've also hired a lot of people in the last year, and really conscious about what's that like as an experience starting at a company where you don't have a network to speak of. And thankfully we've got a great early careers team who are kind of dedicated to bringing people on board and trying to make sure people build a network, have peer support and that side of things. So yeah, it's great from the kind of the people side. But then also just in terms of I actually enjoy my day job. Obviously, there are little bits of admin here and there that kind of not so enjoyable. But for the large part, I enjoy what I do. And then there's the sense that our partners have shipped 180 billion chips, which are based on ARM design or ARM architecture. So just that absolute span and breadth and kind of reach of what ARM does is really awesome. So you feel that what you're doing in your day job kind of can have a difference in the world. So just that knowledge, I think, is really motivating.
You said earlier that you take on a lot of graduates. Could you maybe speak to some of the skills that you see needed and maybe where you see this field is heading in the next few years?
Yeah, and it's a really difficult question to answer directly, to be honest, because I think there are just so many opportunities. I mean, in terms of skills needed, I would say that, the whole reason that the Raspberry Pi project came about was specifically to try and develop those skills. Like when I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. So my interest was first peaked because we had a ZX81 in our classroom. Black and white, no sound, no graphics. And then I grew up in the home computing boom. So we had a ZX Spectrum. My friends had VIC-20, Commodore 64, BBC Micro, and that kind of that was where I got my interest from. And I think that these days there's development platforms for people to kind of get involved with and get excited about, and can get involved with open source software, for example, and actually kind of get hands-on with that as well. And so in terms of opportunities, it's really interesting with open source software, because you have this vast body of software there that's actually being used. It's not just some hobbyist's project. It's get in your car and have a look through the settings, and you'll find all the open source licenses, your TV, and all these consumer products. So it's it's massively dominant, and the big tech companies have large departments now working in the open source space. But as someone young starting out interested, they can get involved as well with open source and make contributions. So I think it's really interesting, that link kind of between the Raspberry Pi platform, trying to get people interested in computing and computer science, and the opportunity now to really take part in some of these open source projects. So I think that is an area that there is a skills need there for sure. So I would see that as an area. And that's kind of on the technical side, but then also the technical side can lead into other opportunities around management and leadership and so on, as it's the kind of the path I ended up following.
I'm interested to just speak to that a little bit more, if you're comfortable doing so, Paul. Many people I speak to have spoken about this weird zone between software and hardware, which is really firmware and then the interface to that, maybe like on the MQTT server type side, just getting into the internet. And very few people are speaking to the hardware aspects. Do you think there are still opportunities in hardware?
Oh yeah, I think so, yes. I mean, there is absolutely a shortage there as well. I mean, ARM is very roughly kind of 50-50 now between people you could say are kind of in the software side and people you could say are kind of more on the hardware side. And I don't personally get involved with hiring on the hardware space, but I mean, of course, people that do, and I think it is difficult to find the right people there as well. So I think generally, I would say there's something of a skills shortage out there. So lots of opportunities, therefore.
So one interesting observation that I've had is, I think many of the people I speak with are talking about the ZX Spectrum and their previous experiences, and a lot of that relates, like you say, to the current Raspberry Pis and the Arduinos. It has been amazing to see in the last 10 to 15 years how suddenly the students who develop small projects can go from nothing to having something that's actually a prototype or something useful within a matter of days. And previously, figuring out how to use a chip, how to program a chip, how to interface with the chip took weeks. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a very big similarity. And I think in 10 years' time, people will think back to the time when they all had Raspberry Pis. And maybe that's a good thing to start with if you're a scholar. Just get some equipment and start tinkering, like you say. Paul, it's been absolutely fabulous. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So thank you very much for spending time with me today, and good luck with the rest of your working from home period and the COVID lockdown. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dennis. It's been a pleasure.